Today we have the poem Ode to the West Wind by Percy Bysshe Shelley. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing. Yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-stricken multitudes, O thou who chariotest to their dark wintry bed. So the poem begins by the poet addressing the west wind. He calls out to the west wind and he says, you breathe of autumn's being. The west wind is bringing in autumn. And he calls the west wind an enchanter because the leaves are falling down and the west wind is taking these leaves away, causing them to fly away in hordes. That the poet feels that this is like an enchanter or a wizard, a sorcerer, calling out, using his magic and making the leaves flutter and fly. And he says, your unseen presence causes the leaves to fly. Yellow and black and pale and hectic red, these are the different colors used to describe the leaves. They are old, fallen, dried leaves. And they are pestilence-stricken multitudes. They are decaying. They are no longer green and beautiful and fresh on the tree. They are being charioted, or they are being taken on a chariot to their wintry bed. So here we see that these leaves are going to be taken and they would be lying in their wintry bed, in a bed of snow. So here we see that the poet is talking about seasons. That is the first thought that comes to our mind. He talks about autumn coming. The winged seeds where they lie cold and low, each like a corpse within its grave, until thine azure sister of the spring shall blow. So here, these leaves, they are going to lie like corpse in a grave. So here we see that the poet is moving towards dark thoughts of ending, of destruction, of death. And these are going to lie like a corpse in its grave until thine azure sister, that is the spring. So now we see autumn where the leaves are falling down. We see winter where they are carried to their dark wintry bed. But there is a sister to the west wind, and that is the winds of the spring that is referred to as azure sister. That is a wind that brings the clear blue sky, the beautiful flowers all over the hills. So he says, the spring shall blow her clarion over the dreaming earth and fill driving sweet buds like flocks to feed in air with the living hues and odours plain and hill. So the spring will bring back all these flowers into the earth, and like a flock of sheep that is rushing into a green pasture to eat, these flowers will come forth and they will take the spring air and they will blossom and they will fill the land with sweet fragrance and beautiful colors. So now we see that the poet is talking about death, but at the same time he is also talking about rebirth, coming back, the cycle of life, the cycle of the seasons. Wild spirit which art everywhere, destroyer and preserver, hear, oh hear. Now he calls out the wind. He is personifying the wind. He talks to the wind by calling or addressing the wind as thou. The word clarion is, her clarion is a trumpeting call made from an instrument. The spring is calling out and asking the flowers to come forth from the earth. Now here we see that the west wind is referred to as wild spirit, and destroyer and preserver at the same time. The words destroyer and preserver are also used in Hindu mythology, Indian mythology, where the gods Shiva stands for destroyer and the god Vishnu stands for preserver. So there is an element of godliness or spirituality also coming into the poem. We have to see that Shelley himself was the most revolutionary of all the romantic poets. If Wordsworth stood for nature, Coleridge was mystic, magic. Shelley stood for revolution, just as Keats would have stood for love and beauty. But the most revolutionary of all of them was Shelley, and his poems like Revolt of Islam, Prometheus Unbound, all these poems show his revolutionary spirit. We can say that Shelley identified with the west wind. He was himself like the west wind. Thou on whose stream, amid the steep sky's commotion, loose clouds like earth's decaying leaves are shed, shook from the tangled boughs of heaven and ocean. So he says that amid the steep sky's commotion, the loose clouds, the clouds are being, they too are falling down, just like the leaves. The clouds are also being moved, and they too are falling down as rain. And this tumult, this rain, all this is caused by the wild west wind. They are shaken from the boughs of heaven. The clouds seem to be standing on the boughs of heaven, and from there, the west wind is shaking them, bringing them down to the earth. So, heaven and ocean are equally influenced by the west wind. Angels of rain and lightning, they are spread on the blue surface of thine airy surge. So these angels of rain, lightning, thunder, all these cause destruction as well as they are a form of life. Like the bright hair uplifted from the head of some fierce Maenad, even from the dim verge of the horizon to the zenith's height, the locks of the approaching storm thou dirge. So here the word Maenad refers to those women of Greek mythology who were supposed to have followed Dionysus, the god of wine, and they were fierce and they were singing and dancing. So these are the images that Shelley is bringing with the west wind. So thou dirge of the dying year, to which this closing night will be the dome of a vast sepulchre, vaulted with all thy congregated might. So here the west wind is bringing everything towards its end. That is what Shelley says. There is destruction. These leaves, these seeds, the clouds, they are all being pulled towards death or destruction by an enchanter, a sorcerer, a magician, and that is the west wind. So the west wind sings or speaks out about the dying year. The year is coming to an end. And this closing night, Shelley says, will be the dome of a vast sepulchre. Here we are made to see a tomb. There is the imagery of a tomb in which all these old form of life is being contained. They are vaulted with the congregated might, with the combined force and might of the west wind. Of vapors from whose solid atmosphere black rain and fire and hail will burst. Oh, here. So he says, from this solid atmosphere, black rain and thunder and fire and hail will all burst forth. Oh, here. So this is the rumbling west wind causing all the commotion, the confusion, the pandemonium. Thou who didst waken from his summer dream, the blue Mediterranean where he lay, lulled by the coil of his crystalline streams, Now he says that the Mediterranean Sea lay lulled, probably dreaming. It is so blue and peaceful and calm, and the Mediterranean Sea itself lies dreaming of summer dreams. That is what the dreams are about, of summer, of all that is pleasant, of flowers and birds, lulled by the coil of its crystalline streams, beside a pumice isle in Bay's Bay, and saw in sleep old palaces and towers quivering within the waves intenser day. But here is where the west wind comes, and forcefully he wakes the Mediterranean Sea from a sleep, from that pleasant sleep of summer, and calls her to these darker, deeper thoughts. And you see the sea becomes more fierce. There is storm, the black rain. So we see that the west wind is stirring the ocean, not letting it be lulled. And also the winds part the waves, and we see that there is old palaces, old towers that are underneath the ocean. This can refer to many thoughts. On one hand, we know that there have been several instances of old ancient civilizations being buried under the sea. Here, Shelley talks about the evolution of life itself, of the cycle of human life. We know that a vast many civilizations have been formed in ancient times, and after their period of fame, they have been buried under the sea. And these old towers are still there. The evidence of a past civilization is still there. Archaeologists and discoverers have found old castles and towers and ships sunk. So he says, and saw in sleep. But here he says that the sea is dreaming of these old palaces and towers that are quivering within the waves' intenser day, all overgrown with azure moss and flowers. So sweet the sense faints picturing them. So these old towers, these old castles, they are covered by moss now. They are dilapidated and moss has grown over it. They are magical. People wonder as to their origin. How did it come about? What kind of life lived there? He says that the fragrance that comes from those flowers is so sweet that the very sense faints picturing them. Even our imagination can sense the beautiful odors, and our senses faint at picturing it. Thou from whose path the Atlantic's level powers cleave themselves into chasms, while far below the sea blooms and the oozy woods which wear the sapless foliage of the ocean know thy voice, and suddenly grow grey with fear, and tremble and despoil themselves, O hear. So here he says that this ocean, which is such a mighty being, full of life, and we see that even ancient civilizations, towers and castles of bygone eras, are locked under the ocean. And there are sea blooms, there are oozy woods, and this great foliage, these great forests, the life in these oceans, they all tremble with fear at the call of the west wind. So this shows us how powerful is this west wind. What a spirit it has that it actually stirs the ocean. Thy voice is heard by the ocean, and they suddenly grow grey with fear, and they tremble and despoil themselves. Oh, hear. So again, Shelley shows us the power of the west wind. Now we see the poem takes a different turn, where the poet brings himself before the west wind. If I were a dead leaf, thou mightest hear. If I were a swift cloud to fly with thee, a wave to pant beneath thy power and share. the impulse of thy strength, only less fierce than thou, O uncontrollable, if even I were as in my boyhood. So now he says, now we see that the poet has told us that the wind influences the leaves. He carries the leaves to their wintry bed. He influences the waves such that the ocean stirs and the storms are seen. The wave becomes intense. Or like a cloud, if he could fly and be shaken from the boughs of heaven. Now we see that the poet wishes that he himself was a wave, a cloud, or a dead leaf. Thou mightest bear. He wishes to be born. He wishes to be taken up by the wild west wind. If only I could feel the impulse of your strength. If only I could feel, O uncontrollable one, let me feel your energy. And then he now changes from there. He says, or if only I could have the power of my boyhood days. So here we see that the poet Shelley is a person full of energy, full of vitality, full of great ideas, but now he has become disillusioned by life. He has become, he has been sapped of energy, of life. He is being disappointed in the world around him, and he wishes the west wind would bring up that lost energy back to him. Let me be as I was in my boyhood and could be the comrade of thy wanderings over heaven, as then when to outstrip thy sky speed scarce seemed a vision, I would never have striven. So if you take a Shelley in his younger age, he says that I would be your comrade in your wanderings over heaven. He was ready to take on the same speed and that impetus of the west wind to travel over heaven. And here we see the power of imagination. Shelley says that my imagination, my poetry would have risen me heavenward. I too would have been your comrade. I too would have spread ideas that it would influence the world around me. And at that period, I would not be daunted to outstrip you in your sky speed. It would be a vision that I wouldn't be afraid of. But today, I have grown older, I have become disillusioned, and I pine for those days when I was strong like you. As thus with thee in prayer in my sore need, now the poet is literally praying to the wind, and he says, oh, lift me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed. So here we see a prayer. Oh, lift me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. This could be the most important lines in this poem. I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed. It is life that is causing the poet to lose his ideas, his imagination. A heavy weight of thorns has chained and bowed one too like thee, tameless and swift and proud. So he says, he sees a portrayal of himself in the west wind. He identifies with the west wind. He says that, west wind, you were tameless and swift and proud, and I too was once like you. The poet was a revolutionary. He was fearless. But he now says, a heavy weight of hours. The every passing day has caused me to be chained and bowed down. So the thorns of life, the very thorns, words, remind us of an image of Jesus with his crown of thorns. The chains remind us of a Prometheus bound down when he wished to help humanity. So Shelley stands with a bowed head. Now, the last stanza, he says, make me thy lyre, even as the forest is. What if my leaves are falling like its own? The tumult of thy mighty harmonies will take from both a deep autumnal tone, sweet though in sadness, be thou spirit fierce, my spirit, be thou me, impetus one. So Shelley is now making a request to the wind. He says, will you to influence me? Think of me as the forest. And just like you have made the forest your home, make me also your home. Drive from me old thoughts, disperse those old thoughts. Shake me up. What if my leaves are falling like the leaves in a forest? The tumult or the call of your mighty strength will bring forth from me to a new vitality, a new energy. So we see that even he says that the years and days have made him older. So he is in an autumnal tone of his life, not in a summer, not in a spring, but his life is celebrating the autumn. But he says that let a deep autumnal tone come from both the forest and me, sweet though in sadness. And even if I am sad, let that sadness be sweet. Be thou spirit fierce, my spirit, you spirit who art very fierce, come on and come into me and call me and be one with me, O impetus one. Drive my dead thoughts over the universe like withered leaves to quicken a new birth. And by the incantation of this verse, scatter as from an unextinguished hearth, ashes and sparks, my words among mankind. Be through my lips to unawakened earth. So here he says that, wind, drive my dead thoughts away from me. I too am tied down by dead thoughts. And let these withered leaves go into their grave, and let my new thoughts come forth from me. Let me come with a rebirth, like a bird of paradise, like the phoenix that rises from its ashes. The poet wishes to rise from his deteriorated, disillusioned thoughts and bring forth a new inspiration, new imagination to his readers. So here we see the death of creativity. Death of creativity is happening. Creativity is being drowned by life and the trials of life. And he wishes, just like the new life that the summer is going to bring forth, he too wishes to bring forth new ideas. He knows that there is in him the ability to cause an influence in the world around him, and he wishes to do that. Scatter as from an unextinguished hearth. The hearth or his heart is still unextinguished. When you see an unextinguished hearth, means the fire is not completely put out. The coal is still burning. It just needs the west wind to come and blow it so that that fire will rise in the heart of the poet. Ashes and sparks, my words among mankind. And like these, from these ashes, sparks will come forth. You have seen when a fire is unextinguished, the fire can still be brought forth. And from my lips to an unawakened earth, let the people listen to my words and let them come forth. The trumpet of a prophecy, O wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind. These are words. This is a quote that is heard everywhere, that is known by everyone. If winter comes, can spring be far behind? So definitely it could be one of the best motivational quotes ever, because Shelley is becoming a prophet here with his prophecy, which he says the wind must blow forth and show the whole world. And that is, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? If troubles come in our life, surely the tide will turn. Surely the period will come when peace will prevail. It is so with seasons. There is a spring, there is a summer, there is autumn, and there is winter. And such is man's life. There are beautiful days and there are also disillusioned, troubled days. And in another poem, Ode to Autumn, Keats says that I may not have the song of summer, but I can still sing the mellow song of autumn. So every period of our life, we can still function, we can still do what is pertaining to that age, and we can always cast an influence on the world around us. Here, the pretext of this poem was when the Peterloo massacre happened in England. At that time, Shelley felt very disillusioned. It was a peaceful protest happening in front of the government, the parliament, but about 18 people were cruelly massacred, people who had no arms. More than 200 were harmed. So this came to be known as the Peterloo massacre. And right after that battle of Peterloo, Shelley wrote this poem because he felt very disillusioned by the political practices of the period. And he wished that a new wave of revolt would change the political scenario of the period. So we can take the poem as in a political framework. That is, if a period of bad rule comes, surely it too will change. And the biblical words of this too shall pass is also seen in the words, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? That there is always something positive, something reaffirming, a rebirth is always around the corner. That is what Shelley means in this poem. One of the usages is definitely personification. The wind is shown respect. The wind is called as thou. Other devices could be metaphor. The west wind is compared to we see that the west wind is drawn to several comparisons. And the spring too, bringing in her clarion and calling out to the buds to come up. Then we see alliteration, west wind, ode to the west wind, the WW. So here the most important message of the poem is that life comes or is resurrected from death. Artistic imagination comes from artistic sterility, and revolution comes from stagnation. So we see a revival or a cycle, an evolutionary cycle in all the fields. Thank you. Word meanings: enchanter, sorcerer; pestilence, deadly disease; azure, bright clear blue; clarion, a shrill narrow-tubed war trumpet; commotion, disturbance; dirge, a mournful song; sepulchre, tomb; cleave, split or sever; lyre, a stringed instrument like a small U-shaped harp with strings fixed to a crossbar, used especially in ancient Greece; incantation, words said as a magic spell or charm;